Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the 40th Anniversary Falklands Malvinas Author Round-Table for 9/2022. We will start with just some short introductions. The intention here is to go through the timeline of the conflict, pointing out ingenuity in the face of adversity is the theme. We can go off topic as we need to, so don't feel too bad about going off topic if you want to, if the mood strikes. First, I'll introduce myself just real shortly. Peter Robbins. I've been wargaming for 3 decades or more, probably since about 85, 84, when I was about 10 years old. I'm aging myself. So I was extremely young when this conflict occurred. Honestly, in the United States, it wasn't covered very well. That's the only memory I have, other than otherwise seeing some of the diplomats talking on TV occasionally, Kirkpatrick and so forth. So as far as my Falklands background, just history aficionado thereof, war games, the conflict a few times here and there, different phases of it, etc. So I will pass the mic. I'll pass the mic to Jorge Boveda.
Okay. Well, I'm a lawyer and a naval historian. I'm also a member of the Argentine Navy Naval War College Review for the past 15 years. And I am the son of a senior naval officer, many years retired now, who passed away recently. And I was in the Navy for a year in 1980. And I am the author of this book, All for One and One for All, Argentine Navy Operations during the Falklands-Malvinas War, and a number of, I've written about a lot of the Argentine naval history, mostly in Spanish. You can find my articles in the net, in the website, and I've written mostly of the Falklands-Malvinas War, but also of other periods in the Argentine naval history. That's more or less it. I have in this book. This is based on my thesis in strategic studies, and I managed to bring together lots of material not previously published in English. Hope if you had the chance to read it, I'm open to any critics, discussion, whatever you have to say. I'm all ears.
Very good. I've read it. It's very good. Recommend it.
When was that published?
It was published on last April 2021 by Elion Publishing, a UK firm.
Thank you.
Tom, all yours.
Okay, hi, my name's Tom. I live in the Pacific Northwest of Washington State, and I am a historian, and I have spent about a year designing a strategic and operational game on the Falklands War, which is a card-driven game. And it has the dubious distinction of being able to play it in almost as much time as it took to fight the war. I'm here to help Peter or do anything that, and I'm just really excited to talk with all of you. Thank you. Mariano?
Mariano, my turn. Hello, my name is Mariano Ceroni. I'm a lawyer. I'm living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Yes, I'm a lawyer like Jorge. Strange. I have a master's degree in strategy and geopolitics. I'm a reserve officer in the Argentinian army. I wrote 4 books, I think four books about the 1982 war, and several articles published in several websites and in other and magazines. I think this is my dog opening the door. Well, I think that's covered a lot of my life. I have a dog, so I have 3 children and a wife. I'm going to close the door and keep the dog out. Peter, your turn.
Thanks, Mariano. Yeah, Peter Jackson Lee. Was a former Royal Marine, down, as we say, down south in '82. My unit left on the Hermes. We basically left the Hermes on Ascension, caught up with the task force, went down, landed. Half my unit went with 4-5 Commando on the walk, and the other half, like myself, were with the Welsh Guards. 2 of the troops had the final sort of heliborne conflict, if you like, heliborne assault on Sapper Hill just before the surrender, and it was stopped at the hill. In between, there's various bits and pieces. I gave a copy of my book, Courage After the Battle, to Peter. I'd previously written. I have just written another one, San Carlos and Stanley. Jorge, I've got your book. I've not read it yet. And Mariano, I've got one of yours. Again, not read it yet.
Okay.
After I left the Marines, I took a different career, which I've just sort of recently retired. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to concentrate on my writing now. That's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah. Santiago?
Santiago,
Santiago?
do you hear us? ¿Nos
Yeah.
escuchás?
Yeah, my name is Santiago Rivas. Yeah. See, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sí, sí, sí.
Yeah, I'm an aviation and historian, but also covering defense matters. I already published several books about the Malvinas.
I think we lost it. We lost your voice.
Wings of the Malvinas, which cover.
Maybe we'll
No
come
te
back.
podemos escuchar, Santiago. We can't hear you, Santiago.
No, we lost him.
We lost
I
him.
think
Yeah.
Give him a couple seconds to kick back in.
He's frozen.
There you go.
Of course, now he's finished. Right.
Santiago, we missed you. You froze.
Yeah. Fortunately, I thought.
Santiago, we'll loop back around to you. Okay, we'll let your internet calm down, and then we'll come back to you if you don't mind. Is that
Can you hear
okay?
me now?
Very little. Muy poco, Santiago. No se te escucha casi.
We'll move on to David.
So
David, do you
the
introduce
Argentine Air
yourself?
Force and Navy during the
Oh.
war, and I also wrote Wings of the Malvinas, which is my biggest book about the war, which covers the.
Okay. We carry on with David.
Yep. Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm David Manley. I think the Falklands has had a really big impact on my life. I wasn't there. I was only at school at the time. But I'm a warship designer. I'm a survivability expert. I'm a weapons effects expert, working for the Royal Navy, and seeing videos of burning ships and sinking ships, set this thing in my mind. That's not how navies are supposed to be. And it started me on a career, which has now, at this point, led me to the position where I'm the Navy specialist on survivability and warship design. And, we're doing really good things, based on what we learned in 1982. So that's my sort of professional aspect. I'm not, going to be, talking from a professional sort of MOD perspective. From a wargaming perspective, though, I've wargamed it pretty much since it happened. I started modern naval wargaming sort of in the mid 80s. I've continued ever since. And on a wargaming front, I've published a number of sets of rules. Nothing modern though. I don't do anything modern just to avoid any possibilities of contaminating the rules with stuff that probably really shouldn't be in open forum. And that's probably just as well because from my professional wargaming side, I'm also professor of naval architecture at University College London. And one of the things that we're doing is we're using wargaming as a training aid for our young engineers. So when they're designing ships or designing groups of ships, we put them into a wargaming environment so they can see how their designs stack up against each other's designs or against historical design. And I also help out on the Royal Marine Staff course. It's one of the things that happens 2 or 3 times a year is the senior captains and young majors go through the staff course, and part of that time they do battlefield rides on the islands, and then they come back to Shrivenham, and then they war game out the conflict using a game that's been developed by DSTL, and I take part in that. I provide sort of the naval background because obviously they're all Marines, so they don't appreciate the ins and outs of frigates and destroyers and nuclear submarines and things like that. So I act as the naval support for those guys. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David.
I think we're to Paul Brown.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Fine.
Good.
Fine.
Yeah, I was an old man during the Falklands War. I was 35, and living in Portsmouth, I saw a few of the warships coming back from the South Atlantic, and I used to watch the news broadcasts, bulletins every evening for the latest news on the war. Since we're all plugging our books, my latest book, which was also published like Jorge's in April last year, is called Abandoned Ship, and it's about the sinkings, the background to those sinkings, and a lot of extra information that I got through freedom of information requests. So I'm a speaker now and writer on naval history, retired academic living in the Midlands of the UK.
Okay, I'll read your book.
Jolly good. I'll read yours, definitely.
I'd just like to say that I have copies of all of the books that we've mentioned so far, all the Helium books, and quite a few others. And I must say they're all absolutely excellent. And,
yeah, great across the board.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. We will start the process rolling here a bit. So obviously the first phase takes place. Let me get my I had a schedule right in front of me. I apologize. So chronology wise, we start mid-March, late March, when South Georgia, the Argentine workmen arrived, etc., raised the Argentine flag. Not too much in the way necessarily of innovation in that time frame, but I do open the floor for anything that the authors are aware of from that early stage, March 19th through April the 1st, let's say, through the 25th of May, leaving port, etc. Anything of note that you wish to talk about from that stage.
Well, if nobody else is going to mention it, I'd like to bring up the what I think is the truly innovative use of Polaroid cameras by the Argentine naval aviators on the aircraft carrier.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I was reading about the trackers. The S2 tracker was being used as a reconnaissance aircraft, search aircraft, and
I work with one of the pilots.
Yeah,
the former pilot.
I thought it was absolutely fascinating that the effect of lowering the radar on the aircraft's performance was so great that they couldn't operate it with the radar down all the time. So they would drop the radar, do a few sweeps, and then the observer would take a photograph of the screen with a Polaroid camera, and then they'd raise the radar and then look at the picture to see what they could see on that. I thought it was absolutely fascinating.
Yes, the tracker pilots, the tracker squadron did that, and also they created an ESM gear, but very locally made. But in fact, it is very interesting that Lynx squadron make the almost the same gear using a Tektronix equipment for the Hampton-Mayfair exocet jammer. The tracker squadron, the anti-submarine squadron, used that for detecting the Type 909 radar, but the helicopters, the Royal Navy helicopters, use that for the Hampton-Mayfair jammer. This is very interesting. That's made in a hurry and with commercial. Now it's a commercial off-the-shelves equipment. That's very rare at the time, 40 years ago. So that's quite interesting. I have a very fond memory about that squadron. Several of the members are friends of mine, including Carlos Cal, who worked with Jorge. It's a very interesting.
Now a rear admiral, retired.
Yes, it's a very interesting bunch of people, very technical, and that's rare for a South American Navy. That professionally, very professional.
They were very outstanding pilots flying not so outstanding aircraft.
Yeah.
But they did what they could with what they had, and I think that's more or less the history of all wars.
So there's also mention of like flybys or overflights by C-130s over Port Stanley at that point, at that phase, that early phase, the pre-reclamation invasion. Was there anything in particular from a surveillance perspective by either side pre-reclamation invasion?
From the Argentine fleet, there was practically zero surveillance. Only provided by the trackers when the fleet was at sea. We had a few other planes, but mostly from the Air Force. We had the Hercules, the C-130. They had two planes, which had to be very, very careful because they were the ones that made possible the attacks on Sheffield and Atlantic Conveyor, because they were the only aircraft that had the sufficient range to have a look what the British were doing. And we only had two of those planes. So we have to be extra careful not to lose those planes. And as the war went on, more and more precautions were taken so that these planes weren't put out of action, as you can imagine. We didn't have Nimrods or so many planes as the British. We had very little. The Air Force was very small Air Force, and the Navy was even smaller. The naval aviation was even smaller.
I might be
tiny Navy aviation.
I might be
just a word. For example, the pilots flying the Super Etendards had only 100 flying hours. 100 flying hours. That's it's like having a new car, and you've been 2 hours on the seat, more or less. On the air, it was obviously most difficult, of course.
Okay, so before we move forward in time here a little bit, anybody else wish to speak of any activities prior to the April 1st, April 2nd? All right. So roughly April 1st, splendid sails for the South Atlantic. And then, of course, April 2nd is the invasion/reclamation of the islands. And then Operation Corporate is officially launched. April 3rd, of course, the Argentine reclamation/invasion of South Georgia as well. Anything in particular around either of those activities?
The South Georgia operation was nearly a very, very near thing to disaster, because the task force that was rounded up for that operation in particular, the commander of the Guerrico, who was the ship, the battleship, the corvette, who was in charge of this operation, was a classmate of my father. So I have lots of details of that operation from the inside. After the war, this guy reached the rank of Vice Admiral. He was the top, the most senior officer in the class of my father. And I talked to him why he. It sounded very strange to me that you enter with a corvette to, a very little
Sound.
Yeah. The sound was so. I couldn't understand that. And he told me that he received a direct order from the, at the time, Captain Trombetta, who was the Antarctic Squadron task force, because the order was ridiculous. Seeing it from this time, when you look back, you don't enter with a battleship a sound which is this big. Okay, so I talked to him about it point blank, and he told me if I refused to enter, I would have been removed on site, and another guy would have made. They would have commissioned another guy to do what the commander wanted to do. So he exposed his ship to these 22 Royal Marines that were waiting for him with lots of ammunition. And it was a near thing, because if by any chance they had hit any exocet launcher on the ship might have blown up. And that's why I say it was a near thing. And he did it 3 or 4 times. The ship entered this sound through direct orders from the commander. Of course, that commander in particular never again was admitted in the Navy after that, because it was a challenge to common sense. The order. I mean. The British didn't do that when they came to retake Georgia. They set all the warships outside range, and they started shooting until the garrison surrendered. That's what they should have done in the first place, the Argentine squadron. Anyway, even though it was a victory in the end, in my book, I say that many rules were broken and we shouldn't do that kind of approach again, never, ever again. So I think the lesson is learned, but of course the Marines, the Argentine Marines, nearly worshipped the commander, Captain Alfonso at the time, Commander Alfonso, because by entering his ship, he made that the Royal Marines started to shoot to him, and not the Argentine people that were the Argentine Royal Marines, the Argentine Marines that were on the ground. So they shifted the attention to the ship, and ultimately they surrendered. But as I said, it was a very close thing, very close thing.
Do you think things would have been significantly changed, potentially, even politically, even for the entire conflict, if something significantly different had occurred at that point?
No,
Okay, yeah.
no, because I think that the decision was made in Buenos Aires, not by the people in the Navy. As I say in my book, the Navy was one of the last to know that the Malvinas operation was coming up. This sounds ridiculous, but my father, who was at the time a commander in active duty, came to know of the Malvinas by the papers when he opened the door in that morning. Okay, so that's I lived this. So my father had been in England for 3 years, so he picked up the paper and said, "We are going to lose this war in 2 months." After reading the paper, commander of the inactive duty at the time, engineer, graduated with honors at ITBA. I think he more or less that's the resume of the whole campaign.
All right, we will move forward just a little bit here. Through beyond April 3rd, April 4th, Conqueror sails for the South Atlantic. By April 5th, the first ships of the British Task Force leave Portsmouth. I'm going to open the floor to, I don't know, Peter Jackson Lee. Do you recall when you embarked and what that experience was like, just as far as what you were feeling? I don't know if you remember, but it seems like a surreal moment.
Yeah, we were actually up in Liverpool, roughly where I am now, on what we call personal weapons training. So every year we have to forego up to a range, do lots of tests on various weapons. And it was April the 1st, so rumours were sort of knocking around about the invasion, and people would tend to think, oh, it's April the 1st, April Fools. But then we finished the training, back down to Plymouth, and everyone started to then realise that something was actually going on. The unit was put on, I think it was second, we put on 4 hours notice to move. So a company who I was with, we were basically selected, put on a coach, taken down to Portsmouth, and then we turned up and the Hermes didn't even know we were going to arrive. So they basically had only just got the signal that they were going to sail in the morning. So we had, I think it was 26 wagons full of ammunition from the various war depots throughout the UK, Scotland and Oxford and places. That arrived, that was loaded, and we just sailed. Originally, we were supposed to be sort of an advanced force, if you like, or a reinforcement for the NP 8901 that was there. But the numbers of Argentines on the island grew very, very quickly. And it was found that 120 Marines are not going to take on 10,000 Argentines. So at that point, it was decided to throw us off at Ascension, and then the Hermes would carry on down south. We would wait for the main task force to catch us up, and then we'd carry on down with them. So after we left Portsmouth, it was lots of weapons training on deck, lots of various bits and pieces, just honing the skills.
Was there anything in particular to meet the rigors of that type of weather, right? Because I mean, what had your unit been training for at the time? You were probably more training for NATO, NATO operations in Germany and so forth.
Yeah, well, Germany's not so for the Royal Marines, but it was generally, as David will probably tell you, that 4.2 and 4.5 Commando are basically what's known as the Arctic units. So every year we have Clockwork Orange. You go across to Norway, it's a big exercise in Norway. 40 Commando was known as the Sunshine Commando then. So we got all the Mediterranean trips, all the good, nice sunny trips. As it stands now, all Royal Marines, all units are Arctic trained. So the weather down there wasn't a big shock because they're generally sort of trained and sort of to go into any environment quick. So you can be in Belize jungle one day and you can be in Norway the following week. So you sort of generally condition that way. So the weather was quite bad at the time, but it wasn't a big shock that we were going to go down to sort of Arctic type conditions.
Do you remember any logistical issues throughout, and in particular as you were coming, as you were being dropped off in Ascension? If I recall from certain articles and so forth, I recall that certain unit you were basically told to take everything you could on yourself as well, right? And
yeah.
And then they were, if I read correctly, they were kind of like just throwing everything they could on in any order that they wanted to. So they had problems later disembarking. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We were taken off the Hermes, put on a Tristan to await task force. I think it's X-Ray or Zulu Company 4-5 joined us at the time because they flew down to Ascension. But at Portsmouth, it was just throw everything onto a wagon, get it on the Hermes, get it down there. A lot of the landmines and stuff we had there were old World War II.
Peter froze for me. We'll give him a second.
Yeah.
Arctic train, but he's frozen anyway.
We'll give him
We do apologize, guys. Technical issues occur. It's not a stream without tribbles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So shall I just comment on that a bit?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Yeah, and I've picked up on a lot of this through the staff college games that we do, because at the end of the games, the students get to brief Brigadier Julian Thompson and Commodore Clapp on what they've done in their game. And the really fascinating thing about that is that the two old gentlemen, give us their stories, their view of what happened at various times. Most of which they tell us, this is Chatham House rules. What we say, within these walls doesn't go any further, because some of it's really quite interesting. But one of the things that both of them stressed was, it's just what you said, Peter. Stuff came down to Portsmouth, Devonport, wherever. It's thrown on a ship, and it's got to be, and it was sent south as quickly as possible. Which meant, that there were some units ended up with, their kit was on one ship, but their ammunition was on another. You ended up with equipment going on ships in the wrong order, so that when, ideally when you'd land, you'd want to set up a surface to a missile perimeter. So you'd want the rapiers. But the rapier kit wasn't the first stuff that came off the ship because of where it was packed and things like this. So yes, it was. I think not ideal is the polite way that they used to describe it. There was some attempt at moving things around at Ascension, but it was very limited in terms of what they could do with the times, the time they had available.
We'll give the floor back to Mr. Jackson Lee if he wants to finish what you were saying. You froze. You were like this. If you remember what you were saying when you were like this.
All right.
Frozen landmines.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some of the stuff was actually just thrown off because it was so old and it had been kept in such bad conditions. We just got rid of it. It was neither use nor ornament. But as David was saying, then you'd have stuff on various ships. And when we got to Ascension, they did, because they wanted to keep the hours on the aircraft flying, the flying hours on the aircraft, on the helicopters to a minimum, because we didn't know what we would need down there. So they were trying to reorganize it as short a way as possible. And then you had the stuff that had been flown down to Ascension that had to be flown out. So it was a big sort of task, if you like, to try and keep the flying hours of the helicopters to a minimum, but move everything around so it's now in some sort of chronological order. So that was the big task down at Ascension.
Was that specifically to keep the maintenance down on those aircraft, or reduce the use of fuel, or
it just
do you
reduced
remember?
the maintenance?
Yeah, okay.
It was a constant battle. And then after Atlantic Conveyor went, we lost that.
Lost all those.
That was a big problem because we had less helicopters, but they were doing more flying. So you think, are these things going to break?
Yeah.
Are they just going to break down? Or
Yeah.
So it was a big juggle factor for the higher echelons to try and figure out the best way to use the helicopter assets, and then carry on with the move forward as well. Because obviously, if you've got the guns going, you've then got the ammunition going, then you've got the men going, and that's going to take a few helicopters there, and that's going to take them off another task. So which task is more important? So it's a constant juggle.
Do you recall just a change in mindset at all? You know, as you were going from Ascension to the Falklands, did they start to get a little bit more real at that point? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
what?
Everyone was thinking, well, you know, it's not real yet, it's not going to happen. And when you got to Ascension, you thought, you know, but when the Sheffield was hit, it's suddenly become very, very real. I think it was at that was the point in time when everyone suddenly realized, oh God, this is going to happen. This is for real. And then, as I said, the mindset changed and everyone just switched on.
This may seem like a trivial question, but how did that news get to you? How did you learn about that first, if you don't mind me asking? You know, I mean, did you?
Ship broadcast.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
And then it was just the grapevine, but it was primarily ship's broadcast.
Okay.
They tended to try and keep you up to date as best they could. So the only way really of doing that was a ship's broadcast.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything in regards to basically up through getting material through Ascension and then onwards to the exclusion zone?
So I think one thing to add on the on the innovation side, this was the point where my predecessors were running around the country looking at merchant ships to be taken up from trade. And the ones that were selected were generally sent down to mainly Devonport for installation of things like flight decks. And one of the people who taught me ship structures is a very charming gentleman by the name of David Chalmers. Basically lived down there for weeks designing flight decks on the fly. And
you did a very good job in that.
He did a fantastic job, and he got an OBE for it as well. But you know, I mean, even now, you know, people in the job, you know, tend to think, well, a flight deck is just a big expanse of steel, isn't it? You just get some steel and you weld it onto the ship. But actually designing it so that it can support those aircraft loads and crash loads and everything else that goes on that flight deck was absolutely remarkable.
It's incredible how quick you managed to do that, and in a very professional way. I mean, it stood the test. I mean, of war. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Also, that leads to a good question. I mean, you know, they obviously were prepared. I mean, had there been, I don't know, it's almost like a post Dunkirk positioning of being ready to do that so quickly. I mean, had all those processes.
A few weeks earlier, they wanted to kill the Ministry of Defense. I understand.
It's one of those funny things. I mean, as far as I remember, there were industrial disputes going on. There's all sorts of issues which, you know, if you were trying to do that in a normal time frame, you know, would have taken weeks or months or would never have happened at all.
That's right. Didn't they have to recall up people that they had just previously? Yeah. Okay.
And I saw exactly the same thing in the Second Gulf War. So when I was a trainee, I was down in Portsmouth, and we had Art Royal came in and she was going to deploy out to the Eastern Mediterranean. So she came in. There was a list of modifications that needed to be done. There were hundreds of items, and that would have been like a 6-month refit to get that done normally. She turned up on like 3 p.m. on the Friday, and she sailed for war, at 2 p.m. the following Monday, and the whole dockyard, everybody in the dockyard just moved on board the ship and just got things done. It's absolutely fantastic. And from what I've heard, it's exactly the same mindset.
Just a quick one on that one, David, to add is, I think it was HMS Intrepid that was right in the middle of a refit. So basically the ship was ripped apart. And within a matter of a week or so, 2 weeks max, it was put back together.
And it had it had to replace a part in motion too, didn't it? It was like one of the first times they had to replace one of the engines or turbines, or I couldn't remember.
Invincible.
I think Intrepid had been paid off under the Defence Review of 1981 and was being de-equipped, ready for sale. So yeah, she was turned around despite that in about a week. Is that me again?
No, I don't think so.
She was turned around in about a week. As David said, I was going to come in on this, that other ships were turned around in 3 days, including structural work. And something like 50 merchant ships were requisitioned and turned around incredibly quickly, with all that work having to be done on them. And bear in mind, there was no prior preparation for this. Whether the MOD had a list of merchant ships that, in the event of hostilities, might be requisitioned, I don't know. I suspect they would have done. But, one of the Uganda was on a cruise in the Mediterranean, and that cruise had to be abruptly finished. The ship was taken to Gibraltar and she was converted into a hospital ship. So a lot of these ships were in the middle of voyages and operations when they were requisitioned. The Atlantic Conveyor and her sister ship were laid up at Liverpool, so that was quite handy. They could be got hold of very quickly. But the ironic thing was that on the Friday before that weekend, the redundancy notices had been issued to all the dockyard workers as a result of the 1981 Defence Review. And yet suddenly they were required to work all the hours under the sun. And they obviously did do incredibly well. And some of those cuts were rescinded as a result of it. By no means all of them, of course.
Give me a moment. I was going to show. I'm just showing. I don't know if this is going to show or not.
I might just add that if I remember right, that Canberra was actually on a cruise and they had to let passengers off.
Yeah, as did the Uganda. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the Canberra was on a Mediterranean cruise, and Doc Jolly, Surgeon Commander Jolly, and a few others actually flew out to her. And once they landed on her and came aboard, the sort of people were starting to talk. They were in civvies, but people started to talk, and then rumours went round that it was going to be taken up for trade. But yeah, she's in the middle of a Mediterranean cruise.
Yeah, one thing I was going to show, I have a picture of it. Lisa, I don't know if you're listening, but I was going to try to share it to the screen. But for the Atlantic Conveyor, I don't know if you've seen pictures of it, but of course they left all the containers on the side, which I thought was just ingenious for protection's sake. But right near the landing pad, there was this huge mast sitting there. I don't know if you've seen pictures of it, and I wanted to show the picture. But they were going to originally take it out for landing's sake, right? But then they in an innovation or ingenuity sense, they had to keep it there because the pilots were not used to landing without some form of reference at that point. I don't know if I think it was mentioned. Yeah, I think it was mentioned in Harrier 809. I think that book. But I thought that was pretty ingenious, and it's just set up pretty remarkably for a short period of time. So,
if I could figure out how to share, I'll show you a picture of it.
yeah, I had a picture of it. I was trying to share it myself,
Shall I have a quick go?
but it's okay. I mean, you can try to share. I don't.
No, that's right. I won't risk it. Anything could happen.
I don't want to take the whole thing down. All right, so we are kind of moving towards, well, the SAS and SBS units retaking South Georgia. Is anybody aware of any innovation or ingenuity during portions of that retaking? During that same time period, also the Argentine Air Force Boeing 707 was shadowing the task force as well, which I thought was, of course, an interesting use of commercial lighting. And that happened throughout the war too. I think they were also using Learjets and so forth for navigation. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, the 707s were not in service in an airline. Okay?
No,
So they were.
it was Navy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The Air Force used them, but I'm pretty sure that they were not flying commercially. Any routes, as far as I know.
Yeah, they were all from the Air Force. Two were former Aerolíneas Argentinas planes, but were serving on the Air Force. And in fact, the Boeing 707s of Aerolíneas Argentinas were used to bring weapons from Libya and Israel during the war.
That's
Okay.
it.
I did not know that.
Santiago knows better than me this area.
That was a part of the war which is not very well known because there were non-scheduled flights, and they fly. In many cases, they fly with no flight plan. So trying to
They
avoid
were top
radar.
secret
Yeah.
flights.
Yeah.
There is a little book about those flights, I think.
Yeah.
I have one.
Alyssa,
And the 707s of the Air Force operated during the whole war, doing reconnaissance and looking for ships. And they were also used to find targets after the one Hercules was modified as a bomber. They used it on.
This is the Atlantic Conveyor. A pity
Yeah,
that the master was lost.
yeah,
Very-
but yeah,
very
what I wanted to point out there was that huge mast in the back, which I don't know if it also has some radio equipment on there or not, but they purposely left it in there so that when they were landing, you could and taking off, so that they could have some point of reference as they were leaving the ship and coming up.
That photo must be from the Ascension, probably.
Yeah, this is when they were loading the Sea Harriers.
Ascension Island, probably, because yes, when we hit it, the Sea Harriers had already flown away.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for us, but in Woodward's memoirs, he calls this ship a third deck.
Mm-hmm.
He calls it a third deck.
I think that picture's actually off Plymouth. That's when they were embarking there.
I think they were embarking at that point.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
think you're right. I think you're right.
So
David's right. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
So something about South Georgia and Great Wrecking. I don't think it's made it into any history books, probably because nobody's dug deep enough, and probably because it didn't actually work. But I was reading an interesting thing. I had a copy of the report of proceedings that was written by the crew of HMS Brilliant. And one of the things that the flight commander and his team came up with, they thought was a jolly good idea, was to improvise bombs made from beer barrels. So they had plenty of beer barrels. They had plenty of C4 that the special forces guys had brought down, and they said, "Oh, it's great. We can build these bombs, boss, out of these beer barrels, and we can put them in the back of the Lynx, and we can have a fuse and a lanyard, and we can fly, over the Argentinian lines, and the observer can kick them out through the door, and the lanyard will pull out and initiate the fuse." And apparently the captain looked at them and said, "Like, you're just insane. There's no way you're ever going to do that."
I'm pretty sure that was just an excuse to bring beer.
No, but it's a Navy and they don't need an excuse.
Okay, all right. It had grog written on the side. I don't know. All right.
And another idea of that time is the some of the helicopter squadrons on the Royal Navy made machine guns, use chairs, turn it up to put up a machine gun there to use it to use the machine gun from the window of the helicopters, the rear cabin of the helicopters, which is a good use for a chair. Yes.
Right. Just don't do it after it's been fired. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. You'll have some permanent scars you don't want to reveal. Okay. All right. So we're getting up towards. We're working our way towards May, of course. The British announced by the 28th of April the total exclusion zone going into effect by April 30th. I think that was pretty much considered the point of no return, if you will. And then we start getting into May 1st, which we're probably gonna have a little bit more input here. Of course, one of the first things early that day is the Vulcan bomber run, which I would probably go ahead and call out the innovation of the multiple refueling capability. So if anybody wants to kind of speak more towards that, by all means.
Santiago Rivas surely must have lots of information on that, but
we can come back to him. I tried to
anyway, they missed the runway. Only one bomb hit the runway, one or two. Because
yes,
my uncle, who at the time flew the Orion, was kept flying all the war on the runway, landing and taking off. So the runway was operational all the way.
It was a fascinating operation that you could have done with a few Sea Harriers.
Probably
fantastic PR success for the Royal Air Force.
Yeah.
Well, and if I could ask, how much do you think of that as inter-service rivalry? That the Air Force really had very little role in the British war effort?
Oh, loads. I mean, it's been noted in quite a few biographies and other things that sailors coming back from the Falklands would turn up in the UK to hear how the RAF had won the war, and the RAF has always had a better PR machine than the Navy, the Army, and the Navy. I suppose they've got to do something.
Do you feel like it was even more of a political, not a political, well, I guess a political statement saying that, hey, if we can reach East Falklands, we can reach Buenos Aires, right? And there's a little bit to that, right? Now, is that too much? Has that been heightened too much? Has that fear? Some people even mention that might even be one of the reasons that the Navy, that was one of probably several reasons the Navy pulled back into port to be more defensive of the continent. But please countermand me if there was other evidence or any evidence to support or deny that.
As far as I know, the British lawyers who advised the government didn't recommend that any action on continental objectives or targets. That's as far as I've read. Even Margaret Thatcher's book refers to that. We lawyers are always in a pacific mode. We're not military. Military, they want to kill everybody.
I thought sharks had teeth.
That's not the key. We lawyers always say no.
Always say no.
Always say no. No.
It's like accustom the Admiral to say, tell no to the Admiral. Learn to say no to the Admiral. There's an article about that. Learn to say no to the Admiral.
About the runway and the innovation, the Argentinian Air Force used a laser gun to mark the runway for the blockade runners aircraft. So in total dark, they point the laser gun to aircraft, and that make the landing easier. So this is not very well known. They made a
Never heard that.
I think 2 or 3 laser guns locally made and used until the end of the war.
Okay.
Interesting.
Coming back to the RAF just briefly, they were facing an embarrassing situation because in the 1960s they'd convinced the politicians that we didn't need aircraft carriers. And so the big strike aircraft carriers that we had were paid off because the RAF said, we can do all this from our land bases. And I think that was why when the Falklands War erupted, they had to launch the Vulcan raid because they said they could do all these things. The fact that it didn't really work was another matter, but they faced quite an embarrassing war where they would have next to nothing to do.
Right. Yes, I'm
Just-
sure that.
Again, a quick one on that one is, I think, if I remember right, it was 11 tankers had to cover in a series of hops that one Vulcan that went to Stanley. Just 12 aircraft for one to bomb Stanley. It was the actual configuration of how they used the tankers and where they were slotted in. I've got to admit, it was amazing planning. Absolutely amazing. Because there was only that ascension.
It was a record for the time, I think. At the time,
Yeah.
it was a record.
That's phenomenal.
And there were multiple sorties too, I believe, over the first 2 to 3 weeks, or at least the first 2 weeks. I think that's what I didn't really know until recently. You
Don't
only hear
forget as well, at the time there was no air-to-air refueling. That was put in literally at the time as well.
Yeah.
I might be getting ahead of myself, but there was also the use of American Shrike missile, harm missiles, basically anti-radiation missiles later as well. I can't remember which platform was fitted with that. Was that?
So they were carried on the Vulcans as well.
Yeah.
Because there was one of the Vulcans had a damaged refueling probe.
Right.
They couldn't refuel, and they ended up. Did they land at Rio? They landed at Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah.
These photographs of this plane at the international airport.
But they weren't able to jettison the Shrike, so it was a political nightmare for the United States, I think, because they had pictures of the harm missile, if you will, on the aircraft still, because they weren't able to jettison it because they didn't want the U.S. equipment to be seen.
The Argentine naval aviators had very little experience in air-to-air refueling at the time, especially remember that the superintendents were brand new, so they didn't have much experience. So the Sheffield operation and the Atlantic Conveyor operation were really a masterpiece of professional flying with people that had very little experience with those planes, and working with the Air Force, which, remember that at the time we had 3 different wars. You know, the Air Force had their war, the Navy had their war, and the Army had their war. There weren't like the British that they have a unified command. Remember that. We had 3 different wars in 1982. There were very little unified operations like the air-to-air refueling, for example. That would be one.
And what do you think is the reason for that? That was the one successful joint operation that the Argentinian.
No, because I think because the junior commanders realized that if they didn't do that, they wouldn't be able to hit the British in any way. Argentina only had the Exocet and the submarines, and that's it. The torpedoes didn't work because they were brand new also, hadn't been sufficiently tested. I had lots of chats with the commanders, with the 3 commanders of the 3 submarines who were operational at the time, and they had never had a shot with real warheads, you know. So Captain Ascueta, who was the commander, the CO of the San Luis, came to know of the Malvinas operations by the radio. He wasn't advised previously that he was going to be in war with the British. So this is that was a reality of the. That's why I say in my book and that the Navy was, was out of the picture until the very, very little, 2 or 3 days before the actual operation. Most senior, and nobody knew that the operation was coming.
So we'll move forward a little bit here. Of course, we move through May 1st. I don't know, Mariano, if you want to speak about the Bonsai Night at all. What had to be perfect for those strikes to occur, right? There were planned strikes against the Hermes for that morning, right? And I think they wanted to, in some ways, emulate Midway, right? That's what the general idea was, to try to do a surprise attack. But I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that at all. I remember you covered it in your book.
Peter?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're froze. Sorry.
Okay.
No, are you meaning for the Bonsai Night?
Yeah, exactly. Just maybe just explain it based on what research you had done. Just what had to go right and what didn't go right.
Well, it's a very interesting issue. The problem is the lack of wind and an all carrier. You need wind over the deck to launch loaded planes, and the wind was not enough to depart with a full bomb load. So the carrier strike was cancelled after that. In fact, I think the planes are going to be destroyed before attacking the target. And if the carrier pushed the attack, HMS Splendid was going to locate the task force and end the war sooner. So was an opportunity lost for the Argentinian Navy, and also was an opportunity to keep in the war. I don't think the odds were good for the Argentinian Navy that night. But well, you need the war is an aleatory art
thing.
So well, that could end anyway. But you have 2 nuclear subs near the task force. You have at all planes. You have very good intelligence in the British side about the locations and intentions of the Argentinian Navy. That's I think this is the key of the war. Argentinian Navy is playing a game of poker, but the British Navy is playing chess. All the cards are there. So the British intelligence, communication intelligence, was very good at the time. So locations and intentions are known not in real time, but with a very short delay. So Argentinian Navy was from the very beginning of the war, was in a very poor situation against the British fleet. And so the alternative history is very interesting, but in this case, I don't think it's very interesting for the Argentinian side. Wargaming, that the scenario was, I think this is the most interesting scenario for that war.
I do have a question around that because I think you had mentioned taking part in some war games around this. What were some alternative approaches to that night and the following day that you've ever experienced, if you're able to say? I mean, I don't know if you're able to say, but do you recall any significant differences of strategy that people have tried in wargaming, as far as from your perspective?
Well, yes, I think a wargamer could use the tracker aircraft to investigate the location of the British fleet, and then organize via the trackers a surface attack in the middle of their air attack, in different axes of attack. The surface fleet from a certain axis, the air attack from other axes, and also to coordinate, that was impossible at the time, the attack with the Air Force. And the biggest threat from the British fleet with the superintendent. So if you could combine the surface, the three surface combatants, the Type A69, the French corvettes, the carrier wing, and the superintendent and Air Force, yeah, well, you have a good scenario there. But was impossible at the time. The Air Force and the Navy commanders didn't communicate, didn't have a hotline. And the real answer between the Air Force and the Navy was no. No. The first answer was always no. And they hate each other. In fact, the junior officers have the communication, the reports, the combination. By jointness at the higher level was inexistent. And in fact, they hate each other. It's more than no communication. So if you want a chance for the Argentinian, well, combine use the jointness. But well, and if you could also add the Argentinian submarine, the San Luis, in the equation, well, better. Could be a good scenario for Harpoon also.
Very good. We will move up through May 4th, which is, of course, the infamous sinking of Sheffield. There's a lot going on here during this time. At any point, Mariano, you can pipe in with submarine and anti-submarine war. I feel like there was a lot more from your books. What I learned the most was there was a lot more going on post, as the 25th of May's task force was returning to port. There was a significant chase, first of all, in the northern area of operation by British submarines. But there was also a very significant amount of anti-submarine warfare going on in that region too. But before we get into the ASW, to speak to the innovation and ingenuity of the attacks on Sheffield through the 14th, for the 4th and beyond. I don't want to skip. I also can't skip over, of course, the sinking of Belgrano.
From the Argentine point of view, it was an attack, a textbook attack, because you had an explorer who was guiding the planes. They refueled. They had located the picket ships, enemy picket ships. So it was the only attack that was made in that way, like a textbook. The attacks on Invincible and the attacks on Atlantic Conveyor were totally different, because we didn't have any more explorers aircraft. So the case of the Sheffield, at the time, I think the British Admiral was unaware that he could be hit by an exocet. I think the French probably told them that they were not operational, something that was wrong. We did made the missiles operational with our own technicians and engineers, and I think it was that was quite a surprise. That's why the admiral, let the ships go so near the Falklands. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have done that. But if you remember that the Sheffield was designed to prevent attacks from aircraft.
If their systems were turned on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So the systems were
Problem.
turned on, but they were, there were various issues on the ship. There were 342s in the forward screen.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate that the Exocets were fired at Sheffield because she was the least worked of the three.
It was a little of bad luck.
Yeah. So was it Glasgow? I think Glasgow was the next one. So all the ships, knew what was happening. The Admirals.
Yes, they were aware that they were being under attack.
Incoming, but Sheffield was the one where there were issues in the command structure. People weren't where they were supposed to be. People didn't do things that they should have done, and that's.
Anyway, it didn't go so bad for Sant because he reached the rank of admiral. So for the Navy, it wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I think he retired as a vice admiral. That wouldn't have happened in the Argentine Navy. Never. After losing your ship.
Yes, it's a very good promotion ploy in the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
Well, he was a rear admiral when he retired. But
rear admiral. Okay.
The Royal Navy
I thought he was
said
a vice admiral.
after the campaign, the Royal Navy said that the performance of officers in the campaign would have no bearing on their promotion prospects because that shouldn't jeopardize the prospects of those officers who weren't in the campaign. And so it should be a level playing field. But it is ironic, yes, that some of the serial offenders in the campaign ended up doing quite well in their careers.
Alan West is another example. Alan West.
Well, yes.
Admiral Alan West.
Definitely.
4 stars.
Yes, it defies logic that he rose in the way he did, because apart from his problems with Ardent, he lost security papers through carelessness subsequently on 2 occasions, and yet he was still continued his upward, trajectory in the Navy.
Well, I definitely he must be a very special guy. That's for sure.
Well, it's what we call the old boys club.
Yeah, the old boys. Right.
Some people like Sam Salt, his face fitted. Other commanders who did very well in the campaign didn't reach flag rank. They had to retire once as captains. It was very unjust for some of them.
Like David Hardike, for example.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm gonna move us up through to the San Carlos landings. I hate to move up too much, but just for the sake of time, so we can try to cover the whole conflict here. We can always come back. If you want. So what are some innovations that are occurring? What is some ingenuity that comes forth as we get through the night diversions and as we get through the landings of Sir Galahad and Lancelot, etc. I know there's a lot of talk of dud bomb hits and so forth in San Carlos and so forth. Let me just open the floor. There's a lot going on between the 20th and the 23rd, of course, of May there. I'll just open the floor to anybody that wants to speak about portions of the San Carlos landing.
So I think it's an interesting illustration of using a navy for something it's not designed for. The Royal Navy became a blue water anti-submarine force, and so sticking it in restricted waters close to land, where its air defense systems are basically practically useless. Your air defense then becomes NAFI gunners on the upper deck with a general purpose machine gun, which did quite well. But yeah, it was a really bizarre situation to be in.
Yeah, and I think the other thing which was highlighted in that period was the Navy's lack of airborne area warning, which it had lost when it lost the big aircraft carriers. And so they had to find some substitute for that in the face of those repeated air raids. Now, one of the things that was said was that the nuclear submarines were stationed off the Argentine coast and mainland coast, and reported giving a half an hour warning of some of those air raids. But what wasn't known at the time, I think, was that there were also in Chilean radar intelligence reports, of course, that I would have thought were giving better intelligence than the submarines. I don't know whether it was an innovation to use submarines as an early warning system for air raids, but it doesn't sound to me as if it would be a tremendously effective system. Whereas obviously the tapping into the Chilean radar, which was set up by the Brits, seems likely to be much more successful. And apparently the day of the attack on the Sir Galahad and the Sir Tristram, the Chilean radar had been turned off for the first time for maintenance. And so there weren't the same level of warnings.
I always thought the same thing as you, Paul. I think that the Chilean had more information than the submarines.
Yeah,
right. I'm practically sure of it. My feeling.
Good. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
I also agree with David's assessment of that the British fleet wasn't prepared for this kind of war. I first read that in Chris Craig's memoir, which is very, very, very simple and very straightforward to read. He says more or less the same thing.
And in some cases, you had para units that were, doing the amphibious landings, which they weren't necessarily particularly, used to necessarily.
It was a Blue Water Navy prepared for anti-submarine warfare with the Russians, not with us.
I remember, I had rewatched the Untold Story documentary. It's a very good one. And there was a second para unit member, sergeant, that was saying that if they had been opposed the first 2 to 3 days, they would have been in some trouble because there was a lot of chaos. There was a considerable amount of chaos, is the way he had described it. Peter Jackson Lee, when did your unit disembark at St. Carlos?
We did the initial landings. We came off Canberra. The big talk was you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So we were taken off Canberra and put into Fearless. Was it Fearless and Intrepid? Yeah, we were put into Fearless. At the time, the helicopter issue, they didn't want to do it, and the sea was fine. So we managed to jump from the loading hatch into the landing craft. One of my mates, Dave, he actually took a dive. He literally jumped but missed the landing craft and landed in the ocean. But luckily, he was actually pushed towards the back of the landing craft and was recovered very quickly. But then on the actual landings, we came in, we got the landing craft off the Fearless, and then we had to wait for the paras, and then it was just basically a 4-hour trip. The paras landed first because their objective was first, and we had to keep circling and then land. We took what we call, on San Carlos settlement, there's a small mound called the White Rincon on the left. We took that and then moved up to the mountain range behind. B Company took the little Rincon, and then C Company cleared the actual settlement and found, I think it was about 13 civilians. And then in the morning, we were just waiting for the aircraft to come in. The first couple of days was absolutely horrendous. They were coming in so fast because we get the air raid warning, but you wouldn't know what it was, where it was coming from. They were coming in basically for the ships, but they're coming in for the wrong ships. They were attacking all the wrong ships. They could have done themselves a lot of favors by getting the correct ships to attack and just basically wiping out our stores. And that would have been it. We'd have been finished. But as the Navy goes, I think as David said, they were just too enclosed. The ships are built for open sea, and all it had around them was mountains. So the systems wouldn't work properly. The rapier systems we had were worse than useless.
And they were firing. Were they firing down too? I've heard. Like
because they were up on the high ground with us, but then we had to fire down, or they had to fire down to the aircraft. But you'd have to watch the fall of shot because they couldn't hit the landing craft that were bouncing around, or the ships. When the ships were firing up, they had to theoretically watch the fall of shot because we were basically in the line of fire. So everyone had to be very careful where you opened up from.
Did you face any opposition on the ground?
We had towards the latter stage, we had Mount Harriet, and then 9 and 9 Troop particularly went up to Sapper Hill. So we had Mount Harriet and Longdon and Tumbledown, and then we got a call to quickly fly over onto the Stanley Road, and a couple of lads flew a little bit too close to Sapper Hill, and they kindly turned the Sea Kings into Cullenders because he got a bit too close. But yeah, we had the last little bit. We were a bit annoyed halfway through when Fire Brigade landed because we were told that Fire Brigade would then take over San Carlos, but they went through us and then they just carried on. So that annoyed us, and then I think CO Malcolm Hunt has made his feelings known in a number of ways, and it was actually put into the war diary that he made his feelings known. He actually flew on to Fearless to try and get us moved, but 40 were when the 27th of May, when Ajax Bay got hit, 4-5 Commando lost the Milans, so 40's Milans were attached to 4-5 and did the walk. Once the Galahad was hit, we went to join the Welsh Guards and then carried on through there. We got stuck in a minefield for 6 hours at Harriet. So we just literally stuck there. We lost one young lad, lost his foot, and one of the officers lost half his leg because they both hit the mines. Because loads of people walked over the ground, but it was frozen. So until the pressure pads were fully depressed, they didn't go off. So yeah, we were just sat there and hit the open ground. Again, they missed us. So yeah, it was different for us. But yeah, on the landings, it was the Paras knew they were going to be pretty much unopposed, but we didn't know whether they were going to be opposed or not. So when the ramps went down, it was a bit of a relief that nothing was coming in. And then we just disappeared up to the mountains for a couple of days.
How was communications during all of that? Was it a bit chaotic through the first few days, or everybody knew where they needed to be?
Yeah, everybody had basically briefed. We knew we had the main group down there. You could see the stores being brought in by Mexi floats. You okay with that one? And then helicopters, Mexi floats, and things. So everyone pretty much knew, and we're on what we call unit net. So everyone was talking to each other anyway.
Okay,
so
shortwave
line of sight. Everyone was sort of just keeping, because we had to go through each other's areas when we were doing patrols. So we obviously had to let them know when we were coming in, roughly when we were coming back, and then let them know when we were actually coming back. So they knew who it was coming back in. I used to go on what we call overnight OPs. So I'd go over the hill at last light and just lie there on the ground with a night observation device Like you've probably seen the IWSs, the big long sights on the SLRs at the time. And we just sort of lie there all night, just waiting. There was one time when we had a lot of Shamulis come across because B Company to our right had actually thought they'd actually seen somebody. So we had to sort of wait for that. But we did the night patrols, day patrol through the day, and the OPs overnight. But again, everyone kept on the net who was going where and who was doing what.
Did you also use any like just signaling or any like call signs or anything like that throughout?
Well, yeah, you have your standard.
Yeah.
Oh, not IFS. No, we have the standard call signs anyway for a unit, and then you break it down into troops, and then a troop or a section would get their own call sign, but it's all linked together anyway. So down at San Carlos, you had the main unit at there, so they had control over who was doing everything. So if you wanted to go out on a patrol, you had to notify them. And they said, no, you can't do that because, or they send you out on a patrol to one place and then they redirect you somewhere else if something was happening. So it was all pretty much controlled from the main unit in San Carlos.
So as units were trying to get across the East Falklands, what improvisations were occurring? I mean, as far as any gear or transporting, there was probably some pretty significantly heavy equipment. Were there any like kind of rigged sleds or anything to that degree?
No, from like an Arctic perspective, you'd have like a Yelper sledge, which you may have seen them. It's a long, thin, sort of canvas-covered sledge. It's using Arctic. There's none of that because you have like the tussock grass. The only way to describe it is you've seen a dry riverbed where it all cracks, and we can imagine that about 6-8 inches deep. So, but then it's all grass on top. So you've got your Bergens, probably 60 up to 120 pound. At night, you're trying to walk over that and try not to break your ankle. But then after Goose Green, we had to go across to Sussex Mountains to Goose Green. And you come across what we call rock runs. And these things are like proper huge boulders. And they're all over. You've probably seen them from the multiple pictures on the mountains and stuff. And you have to try and get over them and walk over them with your Bergen. Now, I had the 84 at the time, and you had like GPMGs, you had 84s. So you've got your Bergen, you've got that, and you're trying to climb over these things and keep your balance at the same time. So,
and they're wet, probably.
Yeah, well, we all got wet on the initial landing straight off because you're at minimum waist deep in water, and no one got dry till after the surrender. You can try and dry, wring your socks out, put them in your groin or in your armpits, try and dry them out. And it just wasn't happening. Trench foot was horrendous. It was rife. And, First World War sort of thing, it was rife. But, no.
Yeah, I think the Argentine forces, the land forces experienced similar, right? And because they were kind of holed up in some higher elevation areas for long periods of time as well, kind of awaiting it, right? So I think that they experienced similar.
Yeah, and it was very hard to carry food and ammunition and everything to the troops on the front line.
Yeah,
because of this.
You literally carried your entire stock, your food, your rations, everything. And then hopefully, if, like say you were doing tumble down, you dump your Bergen and hopefully that will catch you up later. So you had no sleeping bag or anything. And it was getting cold and wet.
Yeah.
What's the name of your book, Peter?
San Carlos to Stanley. It's not out yet. It's by Hallion.
Okay.
It's out in June.
Okay.
So, Peter, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Great.
So at what point, I mean, part of the plan was that the ground forces were going to be completely supplied by helicopters. At what point did you know that that was not going to happen and that you were going to have to carry absolutely everything with you?
The loss of the Atlantic Conveyor. That was the killer.
All the way that early. Okay.
It was that, yeah. As soon as we lost the Atlantic Conveyor, we basically lost the main helicopter support. All the equipment went down, everything. Once that went down, it was a completely different ballgame.
And so at what point,
We hadn't lost that.
did staff at that point have to go ahead and make contingency plans?
Yeah. The whole thing was rewritten. Because you looked at it and went, again, you down to the helicopter assets, because we had quite a number of jobs that were cancelled because there were just no assets to take you, because a lot of our stuff was also on the West Falklands as well, where the Argentines were building up forces. So we thought a counterattack was going to come over. So you couldn't get there because you had no assets. It was as simple as that. You had no.
That was a big punch. Yeah.
So that was massive. Okay, yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
Would
I
you
think
say
the
it was
Navy. I
game-changing?
think the Navy doesn't realize even now the big punch they gave with that sinking. You know.
Oh yeah, it's.
So how
We lost
did
a lot.
how did ammunition get up to? Oops. Hold on. Okay. How did ammunition get up from? I mean, how was logistics working up through the final days there? Because I'm assuming ammunition was running low. But
There was loads of it, but again, it was getting it to the front. So I mean, when we had the push to the mountains and then Stanley, that was one of the main priorities, to get the guns up there and get the ammunition up there. There was a couple of thoughts on bringing the guns forward with the ammunition, but there was one. Where was it? I forget which one it was, but they cancelled it because they were going to bring the guns forward. I'll try and remember where it was, but they decided to cancel it. But it transpires that the Argentines had an OP on a hill above the position where they were going to put the guns. And if that had gone ahead, that whole battery would have been wiped out. And we'd have lost the helicopters as well. So it was literally taken up as best it could, as soon as it could. And thankfully, it sort of, the ammunition kept ahead of the use.
Okay, I got another question. This Falklands War takes the A4 and it turns it into a World War II dive bomber. How did that process happen, if anybody can speak to that? Is that something that, the pilot says to his crew chief, I want these detonators to press so it's going to explode at 10 feet? Or how does that process go on?
Which Air Force, the Navy or the Air Force?
I would,
Which one?
particularly at the San Carlos fight. So I would assume that's the Air Force.
No, the Navy
okay.
also hit. The Navy also made several raids on San Carlos.
Okay.
One sank the ship of Alan West, with 2 sections of 3 planes each. One of whom was carried out by currently Admiral Rótolo. That was the second section. The first section was nearly wiped out, but thankfully they managed to get out of action the missiles that could have interdicted the second section. That's why the second section, led by Rótolo, was able to sink the ship. Even before the A4, and this is from Alan West's own tale. He came to Argentina as First Lord of the Admiralty, and he had a meeting with all the pilots, and he was asked which A force had actually sunk his ship. And he said, I don't have any doubt that they were the Navy A force because they were light gray and they were very easy to spot. So that was the end to a very long discussion in the Navy who had sunk the ship, the first section or the second section. After that meeting, it was all these guys were decorated, which hadn't been decorated. Only the first section had been decorated by Captain Filippi, Lieutenant Commander Filippi, and two other flyers, one of which lost his life in the action. And the second section all managed to get back unscattered. And they were the ones who actually sunk the ship. The Ardent, I think it was. Yeah, HMS Ardent. And they were many years after the action, they were decorated for that action. I was present the day that they were decorated.
Yeah, the one innovative point I'll absolutely give to the Argentine pilots from both forces was that
it was a discussion, an open discussion.
So what they would do is they would line up in multiple. I feel like even though they weren't trained necessarily in anti-ship bombing, they were pretty successful at lining up multiple depths and multiple angles, and I feel like I had a question for Santiago, but of course I think he just popped up. But I was curious as to the accuracy of the naval pilots versus the Air Force pilots. I was wondering if their anti-ship bombing was more accurate by any means.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. The Navy had been trained for years for that kind of bombing,
right?
And they tried to pass that information to the Air Force, but you can't make a naval aviator in 74 days.
Right.
The precision you need. Just bear into mind that these guys could land an A4 in 200 meters, even less, 150 meters. Our aircraft carrier was very, very small. They had to be very accurate, very, very accurate, and these guys had more than each pilot had more than 1,600 hours on A4s. That's a lot, and they all on aircraft carriers. They had been recalled. Many flyers that had been in France doing the courses for the Super Étendard, they were recalled to embark in the 25 de Mayo, so that they were all expert flyers. All with that, they had rehearsed many times in the normal exercises. The Air Force wasn't trained for that kind of bombing. The ship moves in the sea. When you are in the Air Force, normally your target is an industrial plant, city, or whatever, but it doesn't move. To attack a ship that is going 30 knots. It's totally different, totally different.
I wanted to give Santiago a chance to speak. I remember we talked in our interview about now that we talked about doctrine a little bit, air doctrine. I think you had mentioned when we were speaking that the AIM 9L, right, Sidewinder was potentially not, even though it was obviously a better capable air-to-air missile, it wasn't necessarily deployed in its full potential, because equally the British Harrier pilots were provided those AIM-9s at Ascension, really, and they didn't have much time at all to train in new approach procedures, etc. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at all, or are you there?
Yes, in fact,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. When you analyze the way the British pilots, the Sea Harrier pilots fired the missiles, they fired at the old, like if they were all using the old version of the Sidewinders, all the firings were from the back, and they never tried. The main problem they have was not only training, because the missiles were very new and they had no shootings or very little training, and also there's very difficult for the radar to lock from the front, and also from above. There was a big discussion even between Sierra pilots from the different squadrons. Some say, for example, Sharky War says the radar was very useful looking down, while the pilots operating from Hermes, they said the radar of the Sierra was not very good for on looking down or from the front. But analyzing, for example, there's the book from John Shields that was published recently about analyzing all the air combats, and there you see that there was not a big advantage of the missile. The result maybe with the older missile was going to be almost the same. The AM9L has some other advantages. Of course, it was easier to track the target with that missile, but maybe the result was going to be the same using the old versions of the Sidewinder, or a little bit very small difference. So this is one of the myths of the war that, as I said on John Shields' book, it's very clear when he analyzed all the air combats. This is something we talked with him a lot when he was preparing his book, because I also made some. When I wrote Wings of the Malvinas, I analyzed all the air combats, and then we find the same conclusion that the main problem, the main advantage of the Sea Harriers were not the missile, was also the tactics used by the Argentine aviation were very poor, and was one of the main failures. For example, not using escort fighters, so the attack planes were on the mercy of the Sea Harriers. But also, when you analyzed all the weapons that Argentina attempted to drop against the British forces, the main failures were not, or the main issue was not the Sea Harriers, nor the air defenses, was that there were many technical problems with the planes, that many planes had to return to their base without dropping the weapons, and also many bombs that missed the target, because the Air Force was not prepared for a war against.
That's the Navy.
You might have lost Santiago. Does everybody else hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, we'll give him 1 second. We did have some questions from the audience as well, which we'll start bringing in. Yeah, Lisa, if you want to go ahead and bring in some questions from YouTube. I do have some small little mentions of innovations that I had kept a list of that I'll mention towards the end. Okay, so we got one here. Jeff Beeler, what were the goals of the Argentine scrap metal expedition that preceded the South Georgia operation? Good question.
Well, could I answer?
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks. Well, it was a commercial operation. Constantino Davidov was a merchantman, was an entrepreneur. It was he thought it was a very interesting commercial operation to scrap all the old walling factories and then sell the metal, the scrap metal in the mainland. So in the very beginning was the Constantino Davidov expedition was a commercial one. Then the navies entered the plan, and well, they have their own goals about that operation, Alpha operation. So well, that the short answer was, well, it was in the beginning a commercial operation.
All right, Lisa, if you want to bring in another one. Should Michael Clapp have been promoted to acting rear admiral? The Amphibious group seems to have been ignored because he was only a commodore.
Yes,
Interesting.
definitely. Absolutely, he should have been.
Yes. Ewin Solgitailier also, and he's a friend.
Very good.
He's a good book author too, with Michael Clapp.
Paul Brown, any input on this one?
Sorry, I've just been out of the room for a few minutes.
No, here, I'll reread it to you. Should Michael Clapp have been promoted to acting rear admiral? The Amphibious group seems to have been ignored. Okay.
I think he stood out as certainly one of the people who performed well. He was new to his job, but he nevertheless briefed himself well, and yeah, he should have been.
Very good. Lissa, maybe not. Oh, there we go. Did Chris Perry really save the UK by finding the Santa Fe? Ooh, weighted question. I know Jorge has. Oh, we don't hear you.
Your mic's off.
I think you're muted, Jorge. Still can't hear you. He looks like he's saying something really intelligent. So,
Yeah.
Well, I am also in this one.
yeah, go for it if you want to learn.
We are not hearing Jorge. Well, the Santa Fe was a very old boat. The orders of the Santa Fe after the disembarking, so Georgia was to have a patrol area, to have in a patrol area and attack the ship in the area. But I don't think that's going to happen. The Santa Fe was very noisy. He's only able to have to reach periscope depth, no farther, and they have a very limited endurance. The battery is really in the last days. So, well, it's not a submarine. It's like in the total sense was a very old artifact. So, well, Chris Perry had a very good part of the war finding the Santa Fe and disabling the Santa Fe, attacking with the two churches. But if the Wessex, the Humphrey the Wessex, didn't find the Santa Fe, another of the assets, probably brilliant, was going to find the submarine and disable it. So, well, Santa Fe was in a one-way trip, really. So, well, they good part of the war, but I think Santa Fe was doomed since the start of the operation. Sorry, Jorge.
Do you feel like this, Santa Fe would have been more successful in potentially even Carlos Bay or other? Like, where did it loiter? Where had it stayed through some of the early stages of the conflict? I'm just unaware of.
Santa Fe, I think the best spot for the Santa Fe was in the ports. Never leaving ports. Santa Fe was not
okay.
not in a war foot. Really was
okay.
Was not really for any war.
It's a 45-year-old submarine at that point.
Right.
Yes.
Jorge, we don't hear you, unfortunately. Lissa, if you can bring in another question, sorry. Don't mean to interrupt Jorge, but I can't. Sorry. What was it like to be in Argentina during the war?
I was very young, so I don't remember.
I was 6. My only recollection was I was singing anti-Thatcher songs during the mess in the school.
Is that like
me too?
Argentina punk rock songs about Thatcher?
That's what we had a lot of things against Thatcher.
in fact, life in Buenos Aires was very quiet. People don't realize that we were at war by then. It was just not normal life.
Yeah.
I remember that I was in school. I was 5 years old. But one day we made a rehearsal in the school in case of bombing. So we had to put all under our desks. But I have a very small memories of that. But usually most of the time was just normal life.
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
Jorge, we can't hear you. I don't know if you want to try to.
Talking.
I want to hear him too because I know he's got something. he's there. You go.
I was saying that in Buenos Aires, it was normal life. In the south, there was from Bahia Blanca to the south, where we had our naval base and in Ushuaia, in Rio Grande. That was a different matter. Those cities were at war, definitely. There were blackouts and there lots of movement of troops. The superintendents were in Rio Grande. They were in a war mood, not like Buenos Aires that was living in a different country. Buenos Aires was, everything's okay. I was 20 years old at the time. I had left the Navy in 1980 as a first-year cadet. I was just about to turn to second year when I left the academy, the Naval Academy. So I know what I'm talking about. Here, the war didn't exist in Buenos Aires.
So it was important at first, right? It was important at first when they were hearing that, hey, it had been taken over, taken back. But it went quickly out of news as well, or did they keep it from the news as well?
No. The news were very much like Putin is doing it today in Russia. Everything was passed through the armed forces, and they decided what could be said and what couldn't be said. Mostly that we were winning. We were winning the war. Everything was going fine until 14th June. Then we realized that we were not winning and we had lost the war.
So it was very much a cut and dry at that point, black and white. Interesting.
Normal dictatorship procedure.
I will open the floor. I do have a few things I was going to mention. I did the third edition of South Atlantic War by Atlantic Trilogy Group is coming out at the beginning of May, and one of the pictures in there is of a rocket tractor. So I thought that deserved mention as an honorable mention as innovative. But they also mention towards the end of the war, there were a few things that were being tested, right? One of which was the Pucara with torpedoes, which I thought was an interesting concept, but also aerial delivered mines, which I do have a question around mines in general. Was the Argentine Navy just lacking in mine layer capability and mines, or was it just not really?
The Navy had to improvise a man laying ship because they had mines, but they had very limited mines, and they used it around Puerto Argentina, Port Stanley, instead of the San Carlos Sound, which would have been much intelligent. I don't know why. The strategical concept was that the British were going to come through Port Stanley directly.
Well, yeah,
that was ridiculous to think.
That's probably why they were investigating potentially aerial delivery.
The Navy advised that wasn't going to happen, but the General Menendez, who was in charge, didn't want to hear anything about it. he was very good in his comfortable armchair in Port Stanley, and he didn't want to move. But Commander Rovasio from the Beam Cinco told him, "Look, if I were British, I wouldn't land in Port Stanley. I would land in San Carlos." He said it at the beginning of the conflict. But the General Menendez was in overall charge of everything. He disregarded the advice of Commander Rovasio and many others who prevented, not all Argentinians are stupid, only some. Not everybody is stupid here. Yeah.
So speaking of intelligent Argentinian, the one other nod I will give to Radar Malvinas, right? That website in particular is incredible. I'll put the link later. But they put the TPS-43 air search radar. They put it not on the highest elevation, which was interesting, right? But they also put it next to a manger, right? So I guess they treated it like, sweet baby Jesus manger. And but what's interesting as well is they filled barrels full of peat moss around the radar as well. So I do have to give some strong innovative points to the TPS-43 Radar Malvinas crew. That I was quite impressed with some of the. It's an incredible website you should look at. At some point, I do plan on interviewing that author. I think that's where we're at. We're at the end. Any last minute points anyone wishes to make?
We didn't mention the land battery that the Navy made. With
the Exocet, yes.
Made by Commander Perez, Julio Perez, who was a classmate of the academy of my father also. And he could have not gone to the islands, and he personally volunteered to go with 2 technicians, and he was assigned a few more people on the island. And it was really state of the art, something that didn't exist in any place in the world at the time. The battery, now you can buy it from France.
Now all the navies are emulating
or the US or wherever. At the time, that didn't exist, and it was something that he had to build in 15 days. So I think I think we couldn't finish this round table without mentioning Commander Perez, who later Rear Admiral Perez, who was naval attaché in France, of course. The French people loved him after this because the Exocet, who was very cheap at the time, went to the sky with the prices thanks to this guy. So every time Admiral Perez touched France, he had a special escort of 2,000 Marines to take him wherever he wanted.
Nice. So I do want to just thank everybody for attending. Sorry, we need to end because some individuals need to go on to other events, but absolutely thank you very much for participating and taking times out of your late nights, especially everybody from the UK. And just great, good conversation. I hope we can talk again individually or as a group. So it was great.
Yeah, thanks everyone. That was really good.
Take care.
Thanks everybody. It was a pleasure to meet you all.
Yeah, likewise.
And hope to read your books.